a team and fight over it. So if anybody looks up how to spell that, I'm happy to correct it. But this word created, a lot of times people try to make a really big deal out of it as far as like what it means. And it is only connected with God. Some people try to say that it means created from nothing, but you'll also see there's other places that refer back to this event, like in the Psalms and prophets and stuff like that. And there's another word that's used throughout chapter 1 that means to make, which has the implication of you use something that's there and then you make something with that. And in the other places later that look back on this event, sometimes they'll switch out those words. So that leads you to think, well, maybe there isn't something that's as big a deal about this word. They could go either way. The biggest point is who's doing it, right? And remember the biggest point for them, you know, we often try to read into the text instead of just taking from it. And the biggest thing for them, if we're trying to hear it with their ears and not what our modern world tries to read into it, the difference they're seeing is that their creation stories are multiple gods battling and doing other stuff. And this will come back up today when we get back to that sea dragon I told you was hiding in there. They're used to these stories of battle and multiple gods. And the unique thing about this story is that there's just one. Okay, so regardless of if it's creation from nothing or creation from things that are already there, the key point is that there's just one, even though we use a plural word for it. So that's the key. And I used to, when I was in college, I was a biology major and a biblical studies major. So this stuff just racked my brain. I was always struggling and wrestling. And the biggest relief came to me when I realized I don't even have to worry about those things. Because that's not, they weren't writing to us. It's written, remember, it's written for us, but it's not written to us. The people it was written to had no modern scientific concerns on their mind. That what was on their mind was the creation stories of their neighbors. And that's the big deal. Not the many, but the one. Although there is some confusing things about how the many fit into the one. Okay, and we'll get into that more too. But that's the biggest thing, is how does it compare to the stories they were used to, or that were going on around them at the same time. So in the beginning, God created, and then, is it okay if I erase this and start over? Okay. We talked about some different things we need to understand about the range of knowledge for heavens and earth. Remember, heavens in their mind is not the place you go when you die. It's skies. Up there. It is where God resides. It's just not necessarily where we go when we die, but they do share that concept of that's where he is. All right, earth. Where we said, in their mind, they're not thinking of a globe. Does anybody know the first time that humans were able to see, like physically see the earth as a globe? I don't remember the exact date, but it's around the 1960s. From a picture from, you know, one of the shuttles that went up, or one of the satellites or something. I can't remember exactly, but not very long ago. So that when most people read this, they weren't thinking a globe. They were just thinking what's under our feet. So, not a globe. What it means is land, or even dirt. So that's what they mean apart. But remember, they can also mean something together. Just like we talked about when a cow is nice and fat, we don't mean it's kind and fat. We mean it's ready for slaughter. Okay. So the terms together, I'll just do this to save myself some writing. And also refer to the tabernacle or the temple. Which the idea there is where these two realms connect or overlap, right? So you have a sphere up here and a sphere down here. And where those overlap is the heavens and the earth, which come to fruition in the tabernacle or the temple. Okay, so those two become one. That's like the connecting point. Okay, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right, now we can go back to, I don't know how to do that. Okay, well, we'll go out of my head till he gets back. Genesis 1, verse 2. All right, so remember we said it's usually translated and, but because of the grammar of the Hebrew, it can actually mean now, meaning like here's some background information. So now the land was without form. This is all one word. Word I told you that's pronounced tohu. Tohu vavohu, without form and void. Remember I said that this is the two words together, it's kind of a picture of chaos and or judgment. So where that phrase is only used two other times in the Old Testament, and those places it's used as a means of judgment. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's judgment here because it's the first time. So it could be that those judgments are taking the land back to what it was, where God says, you want it your way? Fine. I'll let go of what I do. And it returns back to the chaos. This word without form, it can be used with the sea or the desert. And we think of what those have in common. That would imply without form. Constantly changing, right? So the waves you can see, like they're just, but the desert over time too, there's no landmarks. So it doesn't have any form yet. We start off here with tohu vavohu, and it comes back many times, but it's not always this phrase. Sometimes it's in reference to the wilderness. Okay. If you I'll jump ahead just real quick. I'd mentioned that this word hovering was the word of it's used, the meaning is of a mother bird sitting on her eggs, right? Ready for something to hatch, ready to bring life. Well, this word shows up one other place at the end of Deuteronomy, which is at the end of the Torah, those first 5 books of Moses. They make connections all throughout in different ways to paint bigger pictures. And so they're connecting the beginning with the end. And at the end of Deuteronomy, the people are in the wilderness approaching the promised land. They're going from tohu to this land that's going to be opened up. There'll be many other connections to come through as we get to parting the waters, but there's connections in the beginning that lead to the end. If the chase a little rabbit here, run out of room. So if you look at just like the first five books of the Bible as a unit, the Torah, the next 5 books of the Bible as a unit is the prophets. And I didn't mean to say 5. The next section of books is the prophets. And then there's a next section called the writings. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, T-N-K. That's where we get the word Tanakh from. It's just those letters put together. Well, as I just told you, there's something here that connects to the end here. There are things here that connect to the beginning here. And here, from here to here, from here to here. It starts to paint these pictures, okay? At the end of this section, I'm chasing a rabbit. I try to keep from chasing it too far, but it's just neat. This is where Moses departs us, right? And we're told we're going to be left looking for a prophet like Moses to come. But at the end of the prophets, that's where we get the prophecy that there will be one like Elijah to come. So these connections are painting pictures of the one to come, looking to the future. So I won't chase that too far because that could last all day by itself. But all that to say, that's the importance of these connections of this word isn't just here by accident. Remember I said all these here are intentional. So it just seems like this simple little word that could have some meaning about, the idea of this bird sitting over something that's going to bring life out of it. But it's also connecting us to the end of Deuteronomy, which has other connections, and it just starts to go all over the place. And they're very intentional. They were masters of literature, and we don't give them credit for that. We say, it's a simple story. They were trying to, but it's so fascinating. So it's without form and void. The other thing that's neat here, the reason I point out this Hebrew word, tohu, after every time God makes something other than one day, which we'll get to, what does he always say about it afterwards? It was good. The word for good is tov. So they like to make little puns and things that sound the same too. So we start with tohu and we move to tov. There's just fun little word games. So we go from tohu to tov. All right, it was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. So this is giving us our problem, which usually we just read over that and get into all the creation stuff. But this is setting up an issue like, oh no, it's tohu vavohu, it's chaos, it's darkness, there's no light. So it's without form, it's empty, there's darkness. These are going to be the things that God fixes as we go throughout the chapter. So darkness was over the face of the deep, or over the surface. So this word in Hebrew is tahom. I don't need to spell. That's where our sea dragon's hiding in plain sight. Not that this word means sea dragon, but most of the other creation stories of the neighbors have a sea dragon. That's one of those gods that's part of the initial creation. The Babylonians, part of their story, it's a god named Tiamat, which it's similar to Tehom. Tiamat, Tehom. They come from the same words. Okay. But the point here, it's not a dragon, it's just a thing. There's still just the one creative power, and this is a thing. Now, this shows up throughout the Bible too. It's always this thing to overcome. The waters are always an obstacle. Can we think of other stories throughout the Old Testament where water was an obstacle? Red Sea. Just a few stories later, we're going to get to the flood. At some point, he has to get that back out of the way. The Red Sea. When they go into the promised land, there's a parting of waters again to go in there. So this theme comes up. There's always this parting of waters or these obstacles. We're facing wilderness. We're facing water. These are it's a theme that's set up all right here that's just going to continue to repeat, that we often just read over and get to the good stuff. But it's in there. In the Babylonian story, there's all these gods, and they start off with these gods that are like less connected to what is eventually us. And then there's these sub-gods that come out, and then they battle and they do this stuff. So basically there's this guy named Marduk, and Tiamat, the sea dragon, she's kind of the leader of the forces of chaos. And the other gods are kind of wanting to overcome her and create some more order. And so he takes on, he's like, I'll go fight her if I can be the ruler afterwards. And she's actually like his grandma or his great grandma or something. So it's all, they're all related. They all started from these two, and then they're all related. And so he goes in and he fights her, and he takes the winds, and they come as beings, and they kind of blow, and they make her mouth blow up, and he shoots an arrow through her mouth, and it gets her heart, and then he takes her carcass and like splits it apart. Well, you'll see in a minute. I'm giving away another Easter egg before we get there. When we get to creating the heavens, we part waters up and down and then side to side. What's that same story? But there's no other gods. You're like, why is that in there? That's so weird. What do you mean you parted the waters from the waters? Well, these other stories had the same thing, but there's these battles of these other gods going on. And so it's the same stories without the multiple gods. It's just the one. So sea dragon hiding in the story. So we've set up our problem, and this is and, or sometimes it's translated but. There is hope. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. This word is ruach, which can mean wind, breath, or spirit. When we're translating, we have to kind of go for the idea of what they're going for and translate it into that English word. But in Hebrew, this word actually repeats over and over and over throughout the Bible too. So after the flood, when God, pushes the waters back again, what's present is the ruach of God. When he parts the waters in Exodus at the Red Sea, the ruach of God is present. So all these same elements are present there, but later on it gets translated as like a mighty wind or something similar, but it's the same word. It's the ruach of God. So it's that same thing. The story repeats itself. This word for God I didn't mention either. It's a generic. When we get into chapter 2, we actually find out a name. But the base meaning of the word just kind of means like the powerful one. So throughout this story, as opposed to reading about many gods creating things, we're reading about this powerful one, or the confusing ones, but that have a singular verb, hurt your brain. So the powerful one, you're like, wow, this is a truly powerful creative being. And then in chapter 2, we get his name, which is Yahweh. And in our translations, that's usually capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. But in Hebrew, that's the name of God. You hear some people say it as Yahweh. If you start to read through your Bible, and when you come to this, you actually say that, it starts to make the story feel a little bit different. Like the psalm that says, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." It's, "O Yahweh, our Lord," which makes a little bit more sense. When Pharaoh is talking about Yahweh, he's not saying Lord. He doesn't call him Lord, but it reads that way. He's like, who is the Lord is what we would say, but it's actually, who is Yahweh? But I care, I forgot why I started talking about that. Oh, because here we're reading about a powerful one, and we want to know who he is, because this story is different. Okay, we'll eventually get a little closer to him and figure out who he is. Wind, breath, spirit, hovering. Remember I said it can mean brooding, not in the sense of being angry, but of a bird on a nest. We always call God he, and that sounds kind of feminine. What do we do with that? So we're going to see as this uncovers more and more about it's man and woman that are the image of God. Throughout the Old Testament, sometimes you'll see a phrase that's God Almighty. It comes from the Hebrew El Shaddai. You all heard that term before? There's songs, El Shaddai, El Shaddai. Shaddai is the plural form of Shad. Shad can mean one of two things. And I bet you can get the connection once I say them. It can mean mountains, or it can mean breasts. Strength, masculinity, nurturing femininity. Two sides in the same coin, El Shaddai, right? So it's there from the beginning. We'll get into that a little bit more as we get into the man and woman being created, and when Eve is made from Adam. There's a lot of stuff there that we normally aren't aware of. So the deep, that's a home. In their worldview, wish I had another dry erase board. I'll get it figured out. You know, again, they're not thinking of a globe. They're thinking of just land, what you can see. Eventually, we're going to get to how we create the skies, and there's like a dome up there. Underneath the land, their descriptions. This is where this could take a whole year. You see, we could spend a whole year on chapter 1. What we could do with each of these words is do a word study every week and follow how these are used throughout the Old Testament, which brings greater meaning. We just don't have time for it. But so the deep is kind of what's under the land and out there. Sometimes it's synonymous with the place of death, but it always carries a negative connotation, something to overcome. In the Egyptian story, the sun god travels over the sky every day, and then at night he has to travel under the land and through the deep and battle this chaos dragon before he can reemerge again and come back up. So it's something under there, and the freshwater somehow come up too. But anyway, all this to say, this usually is a negative connotation. But once we have that spirit of God, or the wind breath spirit of God brooding over the waters, now we have a neutral term. All of a sudden, there's already just a slight change from the presence of God. So this means deep waters. This means waters too. This has a negative connotation, but after God's shown up now, it's tamed just by his presence. He doesn't have to battle this thing. It just shows up. So the Spirit of God is covering over the waters. Any questions? So this is where we're going to have to remember. It's written for us. It's not written to us. So he's asking if this, I'm going to try to do it shorter. Basically, does this have anything to do with the Big Bang and formation of planets and summer gas and the Earth is core solid and it's covered in water, so it's blue. And so what I'm trying to remind us, because we want to do that so bad, we want to make sense of what we've been taught to what this is saying. But that's where we're starting to try to read our ideas into this. We got to remember what we're trying to figure out is, what does this mean to the people it was written to? Because that's going to give us it's not that that's not true. It's just more of a, let's not chase that rabbit right now. Because by the time we get to the end, my hope is that you see that doesn't even matter. Right? Because that causes a lot of arguments for a lot of people, right? We want to fight over young earth, old earth, evolution, no evolution. And by the time we get to this, and we've picked up all these other symbols and connections and stuff, we start to see a bigger picture of, oh, that's not even worth fighting over. Because at the end of the day, it's still just, who did it? Where's mine? Right? Because it doesn't matter how he did it, just that he did it. And it wasn't multiple gods, it was one. Right? So that's not to say that we can't talk about that. I don't want to talk about it during Sunday school. We can talk about it some other time, because I wrestled with that stuff for a long time too, and it's real fascinating. I still don't have any answers. I just have lots more questions. But the biggest thing for us as we read through this is to try our best not to bring our modern concepts into an ancient story. We want to hear it, try to hear what they were hearing. Does that make sense? So it could be true, but we're not going to chase that rabbit. So anything else? A good question. We start verse 3 before we run out of time. Are you able to pull up the passage? And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good. Oh, disappeared. Oh, you're good. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Now, there's a lot of patterns here that are going to mostly repeat through the next days. And this is, again, this is meant to be read and reread. And we're supposed to be looking for things that are the same and things that are different. And sometimes that'll start to paint a different picture. Also, we're supposed to start counting these phrases that repeat. And a lot of them will end up with 7 or some multiple of 7. So, and God said, let there be light. All the day. So this is part where we tend to argue over, is this part of day 1, or is this setting the background before God actually started doing something? And this is day 1, or is this all day 1? Well, one of the things you'll notice at the beginning of all the other days, they all start with a phrase, and God said, until you get to day 7, and he doesn't say anything. And that's something we'll wrestle with on day 7. But so why would they make the effort to start all these other days with "and God said" and not mean it here as well? So it's debatable. Again, I'm not pointing at one. I'm obviously leaning this direction that this is actually when day 1 starts. But it's debatable. You don't have to fight over it. But all the other days start with that phrase, "and God said." John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What did I say the name of God is? Yahweh. Okay. It's a verb that means to be. It could be I am, I will be, I have been. It's just to be, it's existence. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This first word, this phrase, Yehi or. Yehi is the first word, or is the word for light. Yehi. And God said Yehi, which sounds like Yahweh. In the beginning was the Word. What's the first word? Yehi. The Word was with God. The Word was God. It's the same core root. Yehi or, let there be light. I'm going to jump over to Proverbs real quick. We're going to talk masculine and feminine again. So the first chunk of chapters in Proverbs isn't what we usually think of. You know, when we think of Proverbs, we think of these little one-liners of wisdom. But the first many chapters are stories about Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom, And I can't remember the phrases used for them, but there's basically a wise man and a foolish woman. I mean, a wise man, a foolish man. So chapter 8 in Proverbs is about Lady Wisdom. And this is something she has to say. Yahweh brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was appointed from eternity, from the beginning, from the Rosh, which is where we get Breshit, in the beginning. I was appointed from eternity, from the beginning, before the world began. When there were no oceans, I was given birth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills, I was given birth. Before he made the earth and its fields, or any of the dust of the world, I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was the craftsman at his side. Who are the let us create, let us do this? Some people argue at that point, there are angels around. Lady Wisdom's there. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. In one of the first councils where they were trying to figure out, okay, we've been removed from Jesus and we got to figure out again, like, what do we really believe about him? Was he God? Was he man? Was he something? This text came up as part of it. Is this text connected to him? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So there's, our heads are hurting again. I'm sure I can feel it. Mine is just talking about it. So, but there's all these things that are there at the beginning. And God said, let there be light. Yehi or. The first word, Yehi, is the same root as Yahweh. Let there be light. So we've created light. And that goes back up here. We're fixing one of our three problems. Remember, there's darkness, there's formlessness, and there's no inhabitants. It's empty. So we're fixing our first problem. Let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good. This is something that comes up now over and over. It's going to come up in the Garden of Eden. It's going to come up in the rest of the scriptures. Because a big conflict, God is the one that knows what is good. That's where we find that out. Our problem run-ins to when we start trying to determine what is good. And we're not listening to what he says is good. We're using our own wisdom. That's the conflict that's going to come up over and over and over. God saw that the light was good. And human sin typically is going to begin with, and so saw such and such. And they decided what to do about it. And that's where they always get it. That theme comes up over and over and over again. Eve will see that the fruit is good for food and wisdom. And then she's going to make her own decision against what was been told. God saw that the light was good. So we're setting the stage throughout this over and over and over that he knows what good is. And he separated the light from the darkness. Now, there's a lot of separation that goes on throughout the scriptures too. That's what all the law or the instructions. Torah gets translated as law. The base meaning of it is instruction. But a lot of those instructions are about separating things from things. There's a theme of separation that runs on. We're to be in the world, but not of the world. We're to be separated. If we don't understand that separation as we move throughout the rest of the scriptures, we're missing a big component. So all these little things, they're threads that start here in what we assume to be a simple story, and they build this tapestry that runs all the way through over and over and over again. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. Now, what does that mean? Because that's hard to comprehend. I go for like 2 more minutes and we'll stop and do some Q&A. How do you separate light from darkness? So how do we separate them? Well, you just change from one to the other. But how do you separate them? There's a problem with my question. I'm again trying to read modern science into an ancient story. Anytime you're confused, you won't always find the answer unless somebody shows it to you. But oftentimes, if you're not sure, you just keep reading. The answer is right in front of our face. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, day one. So what ultimately is he creating? We haven't created those yet. We're going to create those on day 4. That's a whole nother thing to wrap our head around. How do we have light and we don't have a sun yet? It's not going to show up. Well, he said, let there be light. But we haven't created the sun yet. But just to touch on that just for a second, can we have light without being able to see the sun? It happens every morning and every evening, right? Yeah, so it's possible that it's there and you just can't see it. Remember, this is from the perspective of someone down here. They separated light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Here's our answer. And there was evening and there was morning, day one. Are we really separating this physical thing of light from whatever darkness is and pulling them apart? No, we're creating a day-night cycle. We experience day and then we experience night. There's a separation between the two, right? So what we've really created is a day-night cycle. We've created a first day. Notice too, how does their day begin? There was evening and there was morning, day one. We usually think of morning then evening. But for them, the day starts when the sun goes down. It's that day the Sabbath starts the night before. There was evening and there was morning. So if day one is evening and morning, and that's day one until we have another evening, how long is day one? How long did we have darkness before there was created light? That's one long day. I don't know. So it's this conundrum here of, well, evening and morning, that's a 24-hour cycle. So that sounds like a one day. But on day one, the evening doesn't really seem to have a beginning point. So we don't know how long that first day was. Evening and morning, first day. I'll finish with this so we can actually say we got through it day one. This doesn't say the first day. It gets translated that way because all the other days get translated the second day, the third day, the fourth day. But in Hebrew, it makes a point. It could say the first day, but it makes a point to say day one. Why would we do that? For the same reason we didn't really want to technically say in the beginning. This isn't the first day ever, time-wise. This is day one of creation. So you can know there's something before. You just don't get to know what that was. This is when God started to interact. We're creating the heavens and the earth. So I mentioned last week that the land, the earth, isn't actually created or exposed until day 3. What we'll see in day 2 is that's when the heavens are made. So back to, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Did he actually do anything there? Well, those things that it says he's creating don't actually show up until later. So day 1, we fixed the problem of darkness. Now we have light. Day 2, we're going to create the heavens. And day 3, we're going to create the land. So we're made our form. And then 4, 5, and 6, we're going to fill those with inhabitants, fix our void. Any questions? Hopefully these days will start to, you notice review took a little bit, but then once we actually got into day 1, it went pretty quick. So hopefully the other days will pick up and we won't spend forever just in chapter 1. So we won't spend the whole year. Peek on here, make sure there's not something I'm forgetting. Anything else? Questions, comments? In this first day, so most of the days, whatever's active has some component of 7. This one's the hardest one to do. There's 5 times that I think that it says light and 2 times that are darkness, which add up to 7. So he's treating that problem, and there's a 7. That one's a little bit more, could be, I want to see it because there's so many other 7s. You could argue against it, but it's potentially neat either way. Now read it and reread it. Read it and reread it. Start looking for things. Start pointing things out. All right, let me close this in prayer, and we'll call it a day. Father, thank you so much for bringing good from chaos, bringing tov from tohu. Thank you for being present with us in our darkness. I pray that you would help us to sense your spirit and see your light. Pray that you would help us to see you at work all around us. Pray that you'd be at work in our hearts and our minds, and that you would help us to see as you see. In Jesus' name I pray. Yeah. That's a good catch. Day one. Day one. Well, there was evening and there was morning. So. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. End a year on it. What's that? Oh yeah, it's a good one though. It's a good one. I spent years and years and years on that one. It's countless books trying to figure that out, but just eventually got relief of like, oh, I don't have to figure it out. It's fun to play with and learn about, but it's not something I have to solve anymore. I see a different solution.